Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Libby. She's a good friend. She has made it her professional mission to empower folks to build better presentations. She's a professor at SMU's College of Business, and through her own business, The Slide Master, she speaks and trains on this topic of executive level presentations. Thank you so much for joining us, Libby. And if you could add any other details you'd like, please do let others know why you're the best person to talk about executive presentation today.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I went through a big part of my career, and if you had said presentations or you need to get better at presentations, I would have thought, you know what, I'm not the person doing the earnings calls. I'm not the person standing on giant stages. So I don't really need to get better at that. And it took me a long time to realize that we all present, we all communicate every single day. And so a job interview is a sales pitch about yourself and an update to your leader. That's a presentation, that's a communication. And so it took me a long time to widen the lens and see that all of us are presenters, all of us are communicators. And the hard truth I had to learn is that it's not just the quality of your work that is what gets you promoted and gets you seen. It's how well you communicate about that work. And I always had this hope that the person with the most technical ability or the person who worked the hardest, those were the people that were promoted. And it bugged me that, you know what, it's not always those people. You have to be able to be the person in the room and be the person who can communicate about your work. So I'm incredibly passionate about this topic because we all have to present and speak about our work, and the quality of the way we speak about our work is just as important as the quality of the work itself. And that's the way that we get seen and promoted and picked for new opportunities and all of that. So I'm so passionate and believe that everyone should be equipped with the skills to present their work as effectively as they can.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Libby. It's something I resonate with. I grew up in a culture where it's actively discouraged to toot your own horn, let's say, and I work with a lot of people where that's the same. But as you mentioned, in the modern, especially Western workplaces like in corporate America, you have to toot your own horn, you have to be visible, you have to be present, or no one's going to know what value you bring. I'd love to dive into that topic a little more deeply. If you could give a tip to people who want to, starting today, level up their game, give even better presentations, what might that be?
Yes, it's a great call out. And I think when we think about tooting our own horn or being our own PR person, we associate that with arrogance. I have to walk in the room and be arrogant. Hey, everybody, I'm the smartest. My work is the best. My idea is clearly the best. Let's go with me. When instead, it's just about being able to communicate clearly and thoughtfully about your work. It's giving the clearest picture. So if people wanted one thing that they could think about changing, this is the biggest bang for your buck tip, is learn how to lead with the answer. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. You and I come from the consulting world. We're very familiar with what's called the pyramid principle. Many folks call this bluff, bottom line, up front. So the way that most folks tend to present, myself included, we all do this. I talk about it like a murder mystery novel, that, you know, there are clues along the way and a lot of information along the way, and we get to the big reveal at the end. So we lead up to our recommendation and then reveal that at the end. Unfortunately, our audience can either get lost or just simply tune out by the time we get to that big reveal. And so I tell people to flip that format. And this is the pyramid principle, bottom line up front. Think about a newspaper article instead. So I'm very guilty of flipping through my Google News app in the morning. And sometimes I don't click into a single article because of, you know, the horrors. I don't click into a single article, but I still feel like I have a high level understanding of what is going on in the world because I read the headlines. The headline is where the most important information in the article is, and then it's written in descending order of importance from there. This is how we need to structure our presentation. So we walk in and say, hi, I'm Libby, I'm the marketing director. Today, we're going to be talking about why we need to switch social media campaign vendors because of the rising costs. And I need to get a decision on this before we walk out of here today. Great. Wonderful. We have structured it like a newspaper article. Now I know exactly what we're going to be talking about. Everybody knows their role. This is the biggest switch that you can make. Start with that overarching summary sentence. It gives people a clear roadmap of where you're going. They can follow you. It also makes you appear very confident and decisive because the subtext is, I have done the hard work of figuring out what we're here to talk about today, and I'm telling you that up front. So it's a huge change that you can make, and it's all benefits. It makes you look very confident, and it gives your audience a nice lens through which to see your message.
That's excellent advice and easy for people to implement right away.
Yes.
As you mentioned, we both work with highly technical audiences too on occasion. And something that I've heard, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, people are a lot more comfortable with giving the recommendation at the end because you have all the evidence that you built up to it at the beginning. Then it feels like a logical flow in that way. What would you say to folks who push back against bottom line up front and want to present in that way?
Yes. And another part of the reason that we do this is because that's the process that we went through in our analysis, because we dug through all the data and we then had to figure out what it meant. And then we arrived at our conclusion. And so naturally we think, okay, well, I'm going to take people on this journey because that's the way I came to an understanding. So that's the way that they'll come to an understanding. I would tell you two things. Audiences, unfortunately, have short attention spans. And I tell folks that just because we have a lot of valuable information does not mean that our audience has the attention span or the appetite to hear all of it. So we need to give them a reason to care very quickly. We also need to give their brains context. If I say, hey, my business sold 128,000 units last quarter, you have no idea if that's good, if that's bad. I've given you no context, no reference points, no overarching statement through which to view that information. Our audience's brains need context. If I tell you we're going to be looking at the sales numbers, we're going to look at these two numbers and the way they spiked in particular, now that I've laid the groundwork, let me walk you through how we got there. We're giving our audience a reason to care. We're giving them a roadmap. They know exactly where we're going to go. And we've given their brains context. So no longer are we just dropping data points in front of them and they have to do the work of piecing it together, but we're giving them the unifying narrative up front so they know where to place all that information in that unifying narrative.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that extra clarity on why this process and that arrangement of ideas is important. You put the bottom line up front. Yeah. And something else you mentioned earlier that I find interesting is we might think that because of the movies we've seen and the books we've read, that suspense is good in business communication too, that we have to create mysteries and such. But as you showed, that just makes people confused and disinterested. Are there any tips though from storytelling, movies, fiction, in general, that you would recommend carrying over to the business world?
Explosions, like a Fast and the Furious movie. I love the Fast and Furious, what used to be a trilogy and is now like 11 movies. So high drama as much as possible. There's plenty of storytelling frameworks and things that we can steal from Hollywood and that world. And I'm a big believer in that you need to pick the right tool for the right job. And so if you're doing a budget status update, that's probably not the time to say, in a world where we are 38% off our budget. But if you are in a client presentation or if you're trying to sell a new initiative, that could be a time when we lean on storytelling techniques. Nancy Duarte talks about this, of casting a vision of what the future could look like and then rewinding and saying, here's where we are today and here's how we cross that gap. So there definitely are techniques that we can lean on. They're not a perfect fit for every single corporate presentations because many of our presentations internally, it's just, I have some information. I need to give you that information succinctly, and we need to make a decision. So that's not the time for a story, but plenty of opportunities, sales meetings, when we're doing a kickoff, when we're speaking to a big group of people to rally them behind an idea. There's plenty of things that we can do and say, hey, here's the future. Here's that ideal state we're marching towards. Here's the role that you play in that. And here's how we need to get there together. But I think there's plenty of things that we can steal from Hollywood.
Yeah, awesome. And you bring up something important, which is the role that emotion has to play in connecting with an audience. Could you share more on that?
Yes. And for a long time, I would have thought emotion has zero role in corporate presentations because I am serious. I am a corporate person and I create business units and, I clock in at the widget factory and I clock out. I am a firm believer that there is a way to incorporate story and basic humanity into every single presentation. And it's a way that we connect with our audience in a way that we can get to know them in a way that they can get to know us. Again, pick the right tool for the right job. When you're giving a budget update, probably not the time to tell an endearing story about your kid's t-ball team or whatever. But a tip that I give often is about public speaking nerves. Nerves is probably the most common question I get. I'm so nervous about public speaking. I'm so nervous about getting in front of people. What should I do? And I give them the advice of get up there and say some version of this. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. I do want to ask that you give me a little bit of grace, because if you hear my voice shake, if you see that I'm a little bit nervous, please know that it's because I put a lot of work into being here today, and I really want to make the most of your time. So I just ask for a bit of grace as we get into this, and just know that I'm trying to make this the best as I absolutely can. And it's this moment of vulnerability and humanity. And we may think that that makes us look weak, when in reality, that vulnerability endears us to the audience in such a massive way. And it gets them on our side, because we know the feeling. We know the feeling of getting up and not wanting to be there and not wanting to be in front of people. So there are ways to show humanity and vulnerability and connect emotionally. And those things are really important, because it helps create a relationship between ourselves and our audiences.
I love that on so many levels, because I come from a technical background, and therefore I'm discouraged from bringing emotion because it's manipulative in some way. But as you showed in the intro you just shared, that emotion is so necessary for connecting with our audience. Often in professional settings, we're told, okay, we have to be professional, whatever that means.
Right.
And that creates a wall between us and our audience. But by breaking that wall down in the nice, vulnerable, human way you did, then it lets people be more receptive to what we have to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I spoke with someone recently, and he was prepping for a customer meeting, and he was having to tell the customer that his company had made a mistake. They had overbilled, and he was visibly upset about this. He was losing sleep over this. And we talked about, that emotion is meaningful to your client. You are preparing to say that I made a mistake. I am going to own up to this mistake, and you're losing sleep over that. That emotion is important, because your client is going to see that you carry this very heavily, and that you care about it as much as they do, and you care about that relationship. And so that's a time when going in completely stone-faced and saying, we made a mistake, we're moving forward, would really hurt you. But showing that this is very meaningful to me, and I am carrying the weight of this very heavily, can be an asset and can help break down what could be a really difficult conversation.
That's great. And I want to tie things back to the big topic of today, which is executive level presentations. And I'm sure many in the audience might feel, oh my goodness, if I made a mistake at that high stakes level, do the same principles apply? What would you say to them? Where it's okay to make mistakes and be vulnerable.
Yes, it's a really scary thing to think about walking into an executive meeting and making a mistake. Or the one that comes up a lot is, what if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? That's a really scary thought. Now, I will say that the level of importance of a meeting, our level of preparation needs to scale up in proportion to that. So a quick update to our boss requires very different preparation than going into the C-suite and talking about a new initiative. So the best weapon against that moment is preparation to a level that seems excessive. But I want folks to think about that room that you're walking into. That's a really expensive room. Think about, breaking down the hourly pay of every single executive in that room. That's a really expensive room. So it's justified that we prepare and we do everything that we can to not have that moment happen, because our job is to know our business better than anyone else before we walk in. And that means preparing for the body of our presentation, preparing all the backup data, preparing for every single question that may get asked. Yes, it does seem excessive, but that's what protects you from having that moment of, I don't know, let me get back to you later. My students love saying that in final presentations. I don't know, let me get back to you later, because they know that they're off the hook. But in reality, that's not a very satisfying answer to executives of, you know what, let me get back to you later. They want us to know the answers in the room itself. Having said that, mistakes are going to happen. There are going to be things that you don't know, and that's part of the deal. And learning how to own that and correct that as quickly as possible is part of executive presence, because there's no one professional in the world that has ever given they have a perfect streak of presentations and never messed up and never anything. I had a friend back at PwC, and when he was an intern, he spilled coffee on the partner right before a big presentation, like a big client presentation. And there was a lot of trading shirts in the bathroom and whatever, and it became part of lore, which is great. But those things, I don't think folks are surprised to hear those things. So preparation is your best weapon against those things. But being able to deal with mistakes, missteps, and not knowing something, that's a big part of executive presence, because people are looking at you to see, oh, how are they reacting in that moment? Are they looking around for the fire alarm and trying to pull it so they can just get out of there and stage an emergency? Are they handling it with grace and saying, I don't have that. I would like to go and talk to legal and finance to make sure that we have X, Y, Z. And I'd like to get back to you by the end of day tomorrow with a better answer. That's executive presence. That's part of how we handle ourselves, and it's going to happen. So learning how to handle it is really important.
Excellent tips here all around. So much that I love to unpack. One thing I would like to unpack, you mentioned it's so important to be prepared, that your level of preparation has to meet the level of stakes in the meeting.
Yes.
What are some tips to people you'd give for how to come prepared for as many questions as possible that might be thrown your way, especially at this executive level?
Yes. So when folks hear you need to prepare a lot, I think we also hear that means you need to bring a really extensive deck. And I try and talk folks out of this as much as possible, because if you sit down across from someone and they say, I have 48 pages of data, and then you open it up and it's screen caps of an Excel spreadsheet, ooh, that's a tough prospect. That's tough to sit through. And so I don't want you to hear that I need to provide more information to my audience. The story that you bring in to an executive audience should be as slim as humanly possible. You need to do the work of curating. I talk a lot about curating in my training. You don't just collect and regurgitate information, you curate. You think about what your objective is, you think about who the audience is, and you curate the data and the story accordingly. You can have an appendix, and I'm a big fan of, I call it the buddy rule in presentations, where you have a highly visual, insight-centric slide in your body, and then you have the data set, and those are partners and friends. And in the footnote of your pretty slide, you say, for full data set, see appendix pages 42, 42. So you can have that in your appendix. You can have an appendix that you rely on. The other thing is about preparation is we often think that, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going to get asked. It's just free for all. This is improv hour where I have to tap dance. When in reality, we can guess many of the questions that are going to be asked. How much is this going to cost? What are the risks? What is the implementation plan? What do we do from here? Those are questions that you need a stone cold solid answer before you even walk in. So you can predict what those questions are going to be. Also, if you're walking into a really important room, it's well worth the due diligence to talk to the last couple of people who presented to that audience. Hey, how did it go? How did they interrupt quickly? How many questions did they have? Did you dig into the raw data, or did they want to get through it quickly? Doing that due diligence so you're not walking in completely cold to an important room. That's part of the preparation process. That is not only going to help you put together a better presentation, but you'll also feel better because you know what you're walking into.
Yeah, great tips here. And you made it a much more human and inclusive process. Often making slide decks can feel very lonely, but you're saying we should talk to other people who presented to this audience before. That way we know what we're getting into. That's great advice.
Yes.
And I'd love to dive more into as well the topic of slides. Now, this is a podcast, not as visual, but if you were to give tips for people going into executive level presentations, how should the slides be designed?
Yes. Once I went to a co-working space and I had to fill out my LLC name, which is the Slide Master, and someone said, do you build playground slides? And I said, unfortunately, my business is so much more boring than that. I really apologize. So yes, slides are such an important part of the executive presentation experience. It's the language at most big companies and all of that. I will tell you that the number one complaint from audiences is overly text-filled slides. Followed by the number two complaint of a speaker who then gets up and reads those text-filled slides to us. So universally, that is hated because we as audience members hate the information overload and we hate having information read to us. It feels like the speaker doesn't have a lot to provide beyond what's just on the slide. So what I like to do when I coach folks is we'll sit down on their computer and we'll look at a slide and I'll say, hey, don't present the slide. Just tell me what's going on the slide. Tell me in a way that I have no context. I don't understand your business. Tell me what's going on. And they'll say something like, we actually have a huge problem in our supply chain because of new legislation. And I'll say, fantastic. Now that's the through line of our slide. So we make the slide title, some version of what you just mentioned, new supply chain problems due to tariffs, whatever it is. And then we think about, okay, what is the visual that we can build or use that proves what we have just said in our headline? If something on the slide doesn't absolutely support that thesis statement that we have put in the title, we take it off. We put it in the appendix. So as slim, as visual, and insight-centric as humanly possible. Nolan Hames, who is a great trainer in the PowerPoint space, talks about our slides being glanceable, compares them to billboards. When you're flying down the highway, you see billboards and you see them for a couple seconds. Our slides should be like that. Between the title and the visual and any callouts that we have, our audience should be able to tell what's going on within a couple of seconds. Then, ideally, they're looking back to us and we say, okay, let's talk about our supply chain problems, because us and our slides, we're a team and each of us are playing a role. Our slides are the visual part of it and we're the verbal part of it. We both need to be doing different jobs. If we just have text-filled slides and then we're reading those text-filled slides, that's one job. So we need to be doing different jobs. Highly visual slides, and then you complement with the verbal. But think about taking things off your slides until it absolutely hurts and the main point is incredibly self-apparent.
Yeah, there is a gold mine of stuff here. You mentioned all these important things. Title is important. You want someone looking at the slide to get it in an instant if they're just scrolling through your deck. And the slide's role is to complement you as the presenter, not just to make you redundant, which is what happens in many presentations.
Yes.
And I love the other tip you gave earlier as well for designing the slides. You want them to be glanceable. And if you do want to include more information, have your buddy system where it links to a slide in the appendix. Best of both worlds.
Yes, because 80% of your audience will want the highly visual slide. There is, and people always say, well, my boss is in that 20%. They want the full data set. And that's totally fine. We can design for both of those audiences, but we don't have to do it all in the same slide. We're making that information accessible, but we've all been in executive meeting, people flip things and they scroll very quickly. Maybe I'm dating myself that I remember the days of printing out and I remember the whirring of the printer and people would bring in these boiling hot stacks of printouts. And I remember being the person on more than one occasion that had to sprint down the hallway to the executive suites to deliver those printouts. And, that was back in the 1900s before electricity and internet was invented. So I regret immensely bringing it up.
We'll gracefully move past that then. You've given great tips so far about not only designing slides, but also managing nerves, coming prepared for the presentation. There's one last chunk I'd like to tackle in the last few minutes of our session. When you are put on the spot to answer a question, or when you are put on the spot to give your presentation live, often what I found is people will spend so much time preparing the deck, but not as much time for rehearsing what they're going to say. Do you have tips for how to accomplish that well? Yes,
I plenty of times built decks and presentations and then gave zero thought to, oh my God, I actually have to go and say something live. I thought my work was done when I clicked save. So couple of things. I encourage you to sit down and think about what your verbal presentation is going to be. Remember that you do not have to talk in depth about every single thing on the slide. You do have to give a high-level thesis statement. So I encourage folks to write down a summary sentence for every single slide that they have. What is the core thesis of this slide? What is the one thing that you want to take away? Write that down, because that forces you to get to what's the story, what's the unifying principle here. And then when you go to practice that presentation, I want you to do it out loud. When we rehearse in our head and we just kind of read our speaker's notes or we just read it over in our head, it sounds perfect. There's no filler words, there's no stumbling, there's no forgetting. It sounds great. It's only when we start reading it out loud and practicing it out loud when we realize where those stumbling points are. And we figure out, oh, I don't really know what to say here, or actually don't have as much as I thought here. So say it out loud. And again, your level of preparation should scale in proportion to the importance of the presentation. If this is a really, really big presentation, I want you to be rehearsing the entire thing out loud with a teammate. I want them to be practicing questions with you. The other tip, and this is my, the most hated tip ever, is recording yourself. Just get your phone and record yourself. It's so painful. Nobody likes watching themselves, but there's no better way to see yourself as an audience. A third party sees you, and you can start picking out things, smaller delivery things like filler words and all that jazz. But it also has the added benefit of it makes you a little bit nervous, and we want to feel those nerves a little bit before our big presentations, because if we're nervous about public speaking, there's a lot that's happening physically in our body. Our heart starts racing. We might get sweaty palms. Our throat might get dry. All these things. You don't want to experience those things for the very first time in front of the CEO. So if you can practice in a way that makes you a little bit nervous, that's fantastic. We're getting our body used to those physical sensations and knowing how we are going to react before the big day. So practice out loud, get used to saying it out loud, because that's how your presentation is going to be delivered. Even if it's you just sitting at your computer reading out loud, you're getting so much closer to what the actual day will feel like, rather than doing a perfect simulation of what it sounds like in your head.
That's fantastic. As we're approaching the end, I want to tie up all these great things you just shared. Everyone attending, you just got a masterclass and presentation from Libby. Here are 3 buckets that I want us to remember. First, when we're preparing the slides, it's important to remember they're a compliment to us as the speaker, not there to make us redundant. Make them as simple, glanceable as possible. If you do want to have more information that you connected to, put that in the appendix with Libby's buddy system, where you have a link to that corresponding slide. When you're put on the spot to answer a question, instead of going on and on, you can put your bottom line up front. Then people immediately understand why they should keep listening. And the last bucket that we just talked about is the slides are not the end of the story. You have to rehearse your delivery too, because how it sounds in your head is very different from how it actually comes out of your mouth. And when you rehearse or ideally record yourself, that's how you see those areas where you can improve and tighten up. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Libby, for your time and sharing such great wisdom with all of us. I love to share a link that Libby passed along to me. This is more about Libby's work. Let me just put this in the chat for everyone who is here, and also for everyone who listens to this later. Here is a link that I'd like to share. If it allows me to. I can also add this. I'll add this later after the session. But this is a link. I highly recommend you check it out, where Libby has put together a package teaching how to use AI to create great presentations. Super hot topic today. I'm also asked a lot about this, and Libby makes it really easy. Prompts to use, recording, everything. Highly recommend you check it out. And also be sure to follow Libby. She posts a lot of great content here on LinkedIn about her topic of expertise, which is slides. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I saw some great comments earlier. Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Donna. I'm really glad the tips were helpful. And the next episode will come out next week for this podcast. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everyone.